Good morning, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to the new regulations for the so co-organized by Numeum and the Saman Law Firm since 2017. We would have loved to be with you in person this morning, but we had to change the setup due to the sanitary situation. And we are very sorry for that, because 200 Croissant Café with us at the press club, but finally we'll do it online, and we are very, very delighted to do so. So let me say a few words about Numeum, because it may be a new name for many of you on the call. So Numeum was born 6 months ago. It results from the merger of two of the main trade organizations representing the digital sector in France, and now we are probably one of the largest ones in Europe. Our ambition is to be the voice of the French tech sector in Brussels on active policy debate. The upcoming French EU presidency gives us a great opportunity to release our contribution, on which you may find on Numeum's website. So let me quickly introduce the agenda of today. So first of all, our co-president Godefroy de Bensman will do a short introduction of Numeum. Then we'll hear the French Digital Affairs Minister Cédric present priorities of the French EU presidency. We'll then move to a fireside chat with Cecilia Bonfeldal from Digital Europe, covering of European industry champion. We will then open up the roundtable on strategic autonomy with Nicolas Frombremèche, Renaissance Numérique, and kick off the industry representative for OVH Cloud, and Stephanie Fink for Salesforce. Mathieu Veil from the French Ministry of Economy, Anthony Whelan from the EU Commission, and member of European Parliament, will then share their perspective on strategic autonomy on the EU digital agenda. But let me pause here and hand over to Tema with a few presidency. Tema.
The technology education, I was on mute. So I was saying it's really a pleasure to be with you this morning. We would have loved to be in Brussels, but unfortunately it hasn't been possible, but it will be for next time, we hope. So traditionally, the French presidency of the European Union is an important one. It is happening this time in a very specific context for two reasons. First, because of the pandemic, which obliged us to reconsider a lot of things, but also it's going to happen in the context of the French major elections, presidential and legislative. So per definition, it's going to impact, both events are going to impact each other. In particular, as we have an incumbent president and government, which is particularly pro-European, with the European agenda at the core of their rhetoric. So it's going to be an adventure. In addition to the fact that also for two reasons. The first one, because the digital transition is an important element of the discussion today and of the economic needs today. But also because in the context of this pandemic, the strategic autonomy, sovereignty as raised as a major issue, and digital is also at the core of these important themes today. So it seems to us that it will be very important to understand better what are the objectives of the presidency in the digital area, to see how this presidency will impact European agenda, or how they are going to align. So we have today great speakers that we hope that at the end of this session we'll understand better in the coming months. Without talking more, I just wanted to introduce our first speaker and let Godefroy de Bensman, co-president of Numeum, introduce the debate. Co-president and CEO of Divutem. Godefroy, the floor is yours.
Very much, and as the co-president of Numeum. I'm very happy to be with you today. Unfortunately, not in the flesh, but well, happy to open this decisive debates on the EU digital strategy, which is so crucial for us, for our companies, and for Europe. Some weeks ago, some weeks before, sorry, before the France assumes the presidency of the European Council. We're a French organization, but we are mindful that digital regulation comes from Brussels. And so from the start, Numeum, which is a 6 months old organization, we merged Syntec Numérique and Tech in France some 6 months ago. We are absolutely convinced that Numeum's ambition have been to make its voice heard from at the EU level. Most of our member states have been slow to understand that's the only single European market with its over 450 million inhabitants can enable us to compete with America and China with the global markets. Unfortunately, few are still not convinced, and perhaps could say some are trying to hamper our efforts to move in this direction of the global digital market. We should remember one thing: the American and Chinese big tech do not simply owe their success to revolutionary ideas or, I would say, better quality of their researchers. In Europe, we certainly have no shortage of ideas or good guys. No, it's their unified markets, their rules, their one language, and a huge ability to invest that have allowed their success and that have allowed them to reach a critical size in such a short time. And so today, only the European market can offer such an equivalent market, amount of data, financial resources to our companies and to Europe, to the success of Europe. Unlike China or the US, the EU have 27 languages, 27 tax and social regulation, and up to now, too little money. And we are delighted that the European Commission has recently announced its roughly €2 billion investment plan to advance in this digital transition. Let me say you a few words on the top 3 issues on Numeum agenda. First, put Europe at the forefront of disruptive technologies such as AI, such as quantum technology. It's thanks to the deep tech that Europe will be able to reindustrialize and remain competitive. Together, we must achieve European technological independence. But this does not mean being technologically forward-looking. We also need foreign tech for succeed. And let's look at China's story. It's obvious. Second on our agenda is put human beings at the core of technology. Must be our priority if we are to master technology and not the other way around. And third, turn the digital economy into a major lever for promoting decarbonization and biodiversity. Our companies have already taken the initiative to assess their carbon footprint, but digital innovation is a tool to ensure a successful green transition. This is the Numeum's vision. Our objective is to strengthen our presence and actions in Brussels and build of French digital technology, being well connected with our counterparts in the rest of Europe. We hope that this event will be the first in a long series, enabling us to participate in the debates and make proposals to EU institutions and our counterparts also, in the interest of our companies and of Europe. Thank you very much for your participation, being with you today. And it's now time to me to introduce Cédric O, Minister O. Thank you very much, Cédric, for your presence. Cédric, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk today in front of you, and I really want to thank the organizers both the Numeum Association but also Saman for setting that up. The event is dedicated to the priorities of the French presidency of the European Union, which will begin next January, and which will be, I think, very important from a different point of view. We have basically two main priorities as far as digital is concerned, which are quite logical. We want to be able to walk on both legs, both on innovation and on regulation. I'll begin with innovation because I do think, and I think the French presidency is laying the emphasis on the fact that being able to catch up with the digital world as far as innovation is concerned is and must be a priority for the European Union. What we have seen over the past decades is that we are in a world, the digital world, where the leader is setting the standards. And the problem in Europe is obviously that we have to be able to answer to the digital challenges as far as regulation is concerned. And this is heavily needed from a democratic and an economic point of view. But a problem that we're having in Europe is that in a world, I was saying, where the leader is setting, or the leader are setting the standards, there are no European leaders or almost no European leaders in the digital world. If you take the 10 biggest market capitalization over the world, there are 8 out of 10 which are tech companies, 6 out of 10 which did not exist 25 years ago, and 0 out of 10 which are European. And I do believe that this is one of the main issues that we have to be able to enter to in the coming years for many reasons, economic reasons, but starting from there, technological sovereignty and sheer sovereignty for itself. We have to be able to build our own independence as far as technology is concerned, but also democratic issues. I was mentioning that if we want European value to prevail and to be able to be sustainable at the long term on the global scene, we need European champions to emerge in the coming weeks. So that is why we will be laying the emphasis on being able to accelerate as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned. The French President Emmanuel Macron had the opportunity a few months ago to take the Scale Up Europe initiative, which is focusing on talent and innovation, on investment and especially private investment, on deep tech and on public buying. And we want to be able to accelerate on those issues in the coming months. There is also the IPCI initiatives as far as battery is concerned, as far as hydrogen is concerned, as far as digital health is concerned. And we want to be able to structure and to help the European effort to come together in order to be at the right critical size in order to be able to answer to the economic challenges. Those are economic challenges, but also societal challenges. I want to say and quote the fact here that if we want to be able to answer to all the challenges that are facing our societies, climate change and urgency as far as environmental transition is concerned, aging populations, food and problems with culture and so on, we need more innovation and less innovation. This is why we want to lay the emphasis on innovation at first. On the second hand, there is regulation, which is, I said, heavily needed. And we've seen that over the past decade, the societal problems that we have been facing, the challenge and the rising tension that we've seen in the whole Western world, not only in Europe, but especially in Europe, with the Brexit, with the Yellow Vest movement in France, with the rise of extremes left and right all over Europe, is to some extent partly due to a doubt that our population, our middle classes have on digital and on technology. So we have to be able to ensure our population that the spread of the digital world with social networks, with all the tools that we are using, with artificial intelligence, with quantum computing, with life science, the intrication between life science and digital, is still onboarding general interest purpose within the whole deal. And this is that tension and that doubt that we have to be able to answer on, to answer to in the coming months. This is why the question of regulation will be at the heart of the French presidency, with at first two major texts that are under discussion: Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act. We had a historical day last week with Commissioner Breton and Vice President Vestager, with the Council closing the deal and having an agreement on general orientation on the DSA and DMA, and we do believe that there parallel discussion on those texts. We hope that the Parliament will come to an agreement in the coming weeks so that we will be able to begin the trialogue under the French presidency, and let's hope that we can close the trialogue under the French presidency. Those are probably the two most important texts as far as regulation is concerned for the internet over the past decades, perhaps in history. This is why we want to be able to keep the momentum. There is a huge momentum for regulation. The latest episode was the revelation by Frances Hogan, but everybody has the feeling that there is an urgency to better regulate the internet and to input some general interest in the past and in the way the internet has been developing over the past years. There are also other very important texts that are under discussion. I want to mention two of them, especially the AI Act, which has been presented by the Commission a few months ago, which was a priority of the Slovenian presidency. France is really willing to be able to make as much progress as possible with two priorities we think that should be really important. The first one is the unicity of enforcement of that regulation, but also the sandbox framework that should be preserved within the regulation in order to be able to have at the same time regulation, but also a capacity to innovate for SMEs. But the same way we had a very interesting discussion at the international level with the global partnership on artificial intelligence, we do believe that we need to input more regulation at the heart of technology, and the AI Act will be important for that. Second regulation that I want to tackle is the Nis-2 Directive, which is completely different, but not less urgent to some extent. We've seen the explosion of cyber attacks and ransomwares over the past years, especially during the pandemics. It's now tackling public institutions, hospitals, individuals, SMEs, and so on and so on. We need to rise the level of preparation of the whole Europe, and the Nis-2 Directive can be very instrumental to that. As you can see, there is a whole scope of discussion. There are a lot of debates, but it's quite logical. Digital is completely changing our world, disrupting the world we've been living in the past decades. There are a lot of challenges, but we want to be at the right level of answer. This will be the heart of the French presidency. This will be one of the main issues that the French presidency wants to make progress with in the 6 coming months. Obviously, this won't be the end of the discussion, but we have a historical opportunity to set a very important milestone.
So it was great to hear what the French government has in mind, and particularly Cédric O, regarding the digital agenda. I believe that there is no big surprise here. Innovation as the key priority, but regulation also an important one to accompany this innovation. DSA, DMA, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, that are going to be the main theme of the French presidency that will have to be fine-tuned in the coming weeks. So let's see what the business has to say about it. And François, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Thelma. So it's a pleasure to introduce the virtual fireside chat on the theme of how are European industry champions achieving their. And to cover this topic, let me present first of all Eric Fenton. Eric is the Chief Operating Software Republic Division of Renault Group. Eric has been working for almost 25 years in the mobility industry, accompanying Renault Group through its transition towards electrical cars. So I would say he's one of the fathers of Zoe and her siblings. And then I've got also with me Cecilia Bonfeldal. Cecilia is should we still need to introduce you? Cecilia, you are the Director General of Digital Europe, the voice of the tech industry in Brussels, gathering nearly 100 corporate members and 40 happy NTA members, including Numeum. So let me ask my first question to Eric. I'm turning to you now, Eric. In January this year, the CEO of Renault, Luca de Meo, announced the group strategy for 2030, Renaulution, which makes Renault turn into a more. So Mr. de Meo said by 2030, Renault wants to generate at least 20% of its revenues from data services on energy trading. This is impressive. Could you please elaborate on this, Eric?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thanks for that digital transformation is not only a topic for pure players, and that our old industry is really moving in that direction. As you said, the fact of going into transforming Renault Group into a tech company is not something we are planning to do alone, and that's why Luca de Meo, with 5 other CEO of major tech players, decided to create Software Republic as a strategic alliance. So Atos, Dassault Systèmes, Thales, Orange, and ST Microelectronics joining together to combine their skills, create a ecosystem around them with smaller companies to move in this direction. And why software and ecosystem are so much linked? I think because the big transition, the big transformation of the automotive industry that is ongoing as really those two components embedded very deeply in the transition. Of course, electrification is consuming much more software and bundling a lot of skills from different sectors, including energy, the connectivity, the change of the way the electronic architecture of the car is designed, and as well the creation of the service of mobility and car as a service, which is, of course, as well a software and an ecosystem topic. So that's why it was very natural to create this alliance. The idea is to deliver significant services from the skills and the asset of those companies, and to nourish those 20% turnover by our fourth brand, the new brand called Mobilize, that has been created early this year.
Very interesting. What your testimony is very interesting, as we all think that digital is about pure player, people coming from the digital world, but all economy, all industry are concerned today, and that to be taken into account in the way we organize the regulation. So Cecilia, can I turn to you now? You are the digital person in Brussels, and you are leading the major business organization there. You know all the players, of the stakeholders in this area. How do you see this trend coming? How is the regulation today? Is the European agenda tackled rightly the issue of players and traditional industry? Is the DSA, DMA, the cybersecurity, the data package, the rights issue, are they tackled rightly in order to accompany this important transition?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here today. Let's hope that in June, by the end of the presidency, we can actually have a follow-up event where we can all also see each other and be in person. So, I mean, listening to Cédric O, and I really see that France plays a major role here, right? First of all, we have a very European leadership of France at the moment. We have a situation where both Germany and France is in election, but they really lean in and see that they are taking a really leadership role in Europe. Hopefully, I'm not only in Brussels. We have 40 organizations, and in total 36,000 companies are represented in our great network of Digital Europe. And I think if you look at the things on the table, the French presidency mentions like 3 key areas: recovery, power, and belonging, right? And if we go to the recovery, it's the first time in history that we have a lot of public funding actually directed directly to digital. Now, the proof is in the pudding. We actually need to be sure how we spend them. And actually, there was only 20%. Right now, the numbers is towards 26, 27% of the recovery funds being spent at digital. So one of the things that I think we can, was very clear in Cedric O's speech, and not least in Godefroy's, is that we are actually behind in competitiveness, and we cannot solve competitiveness problems with necessarily only regulation. There might be some regulation. Europe is one of the most well-protected areas, continents in the world on everything from digital and everything else. We treat our citizens and well, and so should we. So no doubt. But the competitive issues is also what Godefroy really mentioned. It's about pan-European scaling. It's a pan-European investment, and about removing barriers of, for example, implementation of some of these regulations, which are interpreted in many different ways, hampering companies' growth across border. So let me say, if I could choose, a few things, one on the top of my list would definitely be removing barriers of growth. We want a greening of the economy is the right thing to do. The green and digital strategy of Europe is fantastic. It's the right thing to do, and it's really can put us in a lead position. But we still have problems. For example, let's just look at something like building factories or building windmills that is greening the economy. The building directive, the buildings are actually responsible for 40% of pollution of CO2 emissions in the world. So even implementing a rule on how to bring this down will be interpreted and implemented in many different ways. So these are some of the things that we need to work on. If I look at the regulatory side, well, I think it's totally correct. I mean, the DSA really setting the scene on how we have a safer internet is something that is really needed, and that's something that can also enhance this point of belonging. So yes, I do think that we need to have a common reference all over Europe on how we have a safer internet, even globally. And this is, of course, why there is also now a very extensive dialogue with the US on these specific areas in what is called the Trade and Technology Council. If we look at some of the other aspects of cybersecurity, of course, this is one of the major things that we need to collaborate on across European border. Cyber attacks doesn't really know any borders and doesn't really care. So doing this in a country by country approach is not sustainable. It would be one of the biggest failures of us to do. We need the countries to act, but we really need a common cyber defense that is European and can act across border to meet those threats. Now, looking at the Data Governance Act and some of these really cool data initiatives, there is no doubt right now 12% of SMEs are using data in their business models. This is nothing. Data is going to be the major game changer of competitiveness. And this is also why you see Renault and other companies really looking at their digital data and how they use it. It's not a digital game. This is a competitive game that affects all industries. So, for example, things like the Data Governance Act and the data spaces is very, very welcome. It's something that we need, and I would say the target is that we in 2025, actually have equal access for SMEs to data than every other company. Today, we know that of the biggest two blockers for growth of the SMEs across border is access to data and the barriers of diverse and unharmonized implementation of regulation across Europe. So we really need the data, and I think the files that they are looking at are really the right files. Then, of course, we need to see that we also actually create one harmonized market of growth, not only introducing new rules.
Thank you, Cecilia. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on the concern you raised about building. Digital Europe has recently released a report titled Digital action is climate action. 8 ideas to accelerate on the twin transition. And I would be very happy if you could, I would say, share with us some of the key takeaways from this report. And second, just obvious question, what is Digital Europe expecting from the French EU presidency?
Okay, let me maybe flip the other way around. I mean, for me, the French presidency is a unique chance for one of the biggest and most, how do you say, European countries to really take a leadership, not only in Europe, but also on the international scene. Europe is by far ahead of the rest of the world in digital governance. And I don't want to say only digital regulations, but digital governance. Of course, first, we need to fix our home base. So I hope that the French presidency will be an opportunity to really drive harmonization across Europe on a few and the most important things, amongst others, basically access to data. Then I hope that they will also have a close dialogue abroad with some of our major trading partners. We know that 86% of European headquarters companies' growth, so 86% of their growth comes outside Europe. So this also tells, a little bit about the internal market, but it also tells that we have huge interest in aligning also governance with some of our major trading partners. And I hope that we will see also France take lead in this really. And then of course the great focus that has been on innovation and SMEs from France, that we keep an eye on, of course, the bigger companies and having the possibility for them to scale and have a sound home base, but that we don't forget about all the SMEs. I mean, Digital Europe, as you know, and you also have a candidate in there, and thank you for that. We hand out a unicorn award for scale-up, innovative tech scale-up in the broader sense, not necessarily only pure players, tech, but from all industries every year. And we see these scale-ups. Right now, Europe only have 5% of the world's unicorn. 5%, although we are one of the strongest economies and well-educated population. And basically, they leave Europe due to the factors that I mentioned before. France has really put a focus on this. How can we monitor the success of scale-ups across Europe and see them not leaving Europe at a very early stage? So hopefully this will also be, a chance for the French presidency to really set, a sharp eye and a KPI for how to increase the number of scale-ups and unicorns in Europe. Because this will basically be the foundation of the future competitiveness and the future stability of a sound ecosystem in Europe, that we also have, big European companies that are globally competitive. Then maybe going to the green. I mean, this is a huge opportunity because, I mean, I think one of the roles of politicians, in my view, is to think long term, not only short term. The green agenda, let's just imagine if we don't tackle this now, what will it actually mean? It means that we will have huge disasters that we will not be able to basically encounter the consequence of. So what we did together with Numeum and other of our members was basically to look at how, if we now have all this money at the table for green and digital, how do we actually enable this digital competences into the greening agenda? Because I don't think there will be a green economy without a digital economy. That is the tool. I mean, we know that the CO2 emissions can be brought down by 20% only by application of digital technologies. Let's look at the buildings, for example. We know that 40% of the emissions that comes out of buildings, if we can, for example, install digital twins that can monitor already in the architecture phase, how will the energy be spent? How will the charging stations in the basement for the cars? How will we make sure that we have sensors basically monitoring how we use our light, our energy in the building, etc. Installing solar cells, making sure that when it gets darker, it actually saves the energy and uses it in the night. So these are some of the things that you can do already in the architecture phase. You can monitor the use, comparing with that digital twin, using the census when you take the building into use. And you can actually do it also in the maintenance of it, knowing exactly what you need to repair in advance. This is just one single example. We have 22 examples in the publications that we did with our members. And we have a lot of innovative companies like Dassault and other companies in Europe, Siemens, Schneider, who are really excellent in this area, who are world leading in this area. So how can we both boost our, economy, our most competent companies in this area, and really do what is needed, which is a greening of the economy, and of course enhancing our global competitive at the same time. So this is exactly what we have done with our members, and I urge you to go to the Digital Europe website and find on our front page this new thought leadership piece that we have done on how digitalization can really move forward the greening of the economy, and not least make us also more competitive areas of the economy.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I hope I'm not on mute this time. No, I don't think so. Let me just elaborate a little bit. Very interesting what you were saying. The core of a lot of other priorities within the within Europe. Can I ask you, before we move to the roundtable with our other speakers, I think it would be great to hear you on how do you approach this priority of strategic autonomy? How does it fit into the discussion? Willing to be at the same time autonomous in the way we are dealing with me and the politics today, but also, as you rightly said, and your number was impressive, the turnover of European company outside of Europe. How does it work? And does it work?
I'm not sure I have the total, the golden nugget on how this works. But I must say, so first I want to say there is a global economy. It's a fact. The other way. I mean, right now we have to be super careful that it doesn't turn into some kind of everybody has their own opinion on what, autonomy and sovereignty is. I mean, sovereignty is a term for nation states, right? Where they look at the ability to take decisions and the ability to act. And I think it's very important that we actually encourage, Europe to define very clearly what is sovereignty and autonomy. Let me look at where it comes from. Up to a world where we don't have supply of some of the most critical things in Europe and in US for that matter, because we have had this global economy and we hadn't had a crisis for a long time. So maybe we haven't asked ourselves, what if there is a crisis? What do we actually do? Do we actually, are we able to supply the society with, for example, semiconductors and other things? And of course, this question of critical supply is very important. And we need to be sure that we can get the critical supply of things, for example, for the society to work. So this is a very valid point. Then if we talk about data sovereignty or digital sovereignty, I mean, this should, of course, only be for the specific areas of really, really critical areas for the society. And this discussion has to take place, of course, between the governments. So what are we talking about? High security areas where we need, for example, to be sure that data cannot be accessed. But I really think for the other things, and we need to look at it on the why. What is the sensitive data that needs to be totally protected? But in general, I mean, the data economy needs to flourish in an open economy where we are not sovereign in the areas where we don't need to be sovereign. And I don't think it's a term for private sector, to be honest. So yes, Europe is waking up to the fact that, as Cédric said, there are nearly no big European tech giants, but we have very competitive companies in areas like I mentioned before, the greening of the economy. And we have to ask ourselves, where exactly is it that we need to be sovereign? Where is it that we need to be open? And really limit the areas of sovereignty, like any other, like the US, like everybody else does. So I think this is. I really feel that it's important for the European member states to agree on these terms. Now, does it actually? I mean, it is a fact that we do see our scale-ups leave Europe very early. That we have lack of scaling, not lack of ideas. We do not lack ideas, and Godfrey said this, right? I mean, we have really creative, fantastic companies. Scaling, that's a problem, and that's where we need to focus. Nobody is following somebody who's being protected. They are not competitive and competent. So Europe needs to be competent. They need to be competitive. And then, of course, there are critical areas where the critical areas where they need technologies or technology platforms or whatever that is to be in a certain way. But it shouldn't definitely not be locking down our relationships to our foreign markets. That would be quite a disaster for our economy and for our current companies, as they are highly interdependent on a global, fantastic and innovative and competitive environment.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive answer. And we see that you are, it's a passionate debate. To be need also to be open and allow us the openness. And as you are one of these European global champion, and you need the rest of the world. You are part of the rest of the world, but I would like to come back to a very specific issue, which is the experience of Renault in this regard. You open to the world, emblematic and kind of visionary regarding the green transition for the car industry with the electric car 10 years ago. You are at the core of. You are now at a new stage of your development. This development, what is your role within Renault, as you are Mr. Digital within Renault? How do you approach that, in particular in order to ensure the digital transition, the environmental transition, which is, as Cecilia rightly said, one of the core priorities today of not only Europe, but the rest of the world?
Yeah, thank you. This is a key question. And just for me, I would just bounce on what Cecilia Bonfeld just said on startup and smaller company and scale up. In Software Republic, we are 6 big groups, I would say 6 dinosaurs somehow, and we have really embedded in our strategy, in our way of working, to create a startup ecosystem around us and use and grow the common software business, the common software product with those startups. And I think it's already moving quite well, as we had a big challenge launched early this fall, and more than 150 startups or scale-up are joining us, and we are already cooperating on very concrete action, not only on the communication side, but really on the business side. And we really believe that we need them to help in our transformation. To come back on the green side, of course, as you said, we have in Renault about 10 years experience already on electric vehicle, electric mobility, which is giving us advantage in understanding those states. We have been creating, for example, and I have been creating in more than 5 years ago the first electricity team, energy team inside I think an OEM, which is now growing inside the Mobilize brand that I mentioned before. And so I think our first priority on the green transition, the Software Republic, is to help to use the car and the electrification on both sides, downstream to help the customer have a better experience with the electric vehicle, with the charging, with the traveling, which is of course changing a lot the habit we had with some petrol engine, and also, and this is quite new and I think very important, using the electric car as a support to the greenification of the grid and the production. Electric car is, I think, a great tool to support intermittent sources of energy as a storage mean, and this is of course requiring a lot of software, and we are going in that direction, and that enables me to pass one message of the need of declustering the mobility sector and the energy sector, which are sometimes not so much connected, whether in our companies, whether in the different initiative. And I think there is a lot of value for the communities, for the companies, for the countries in connecting better those two sectors, because this really will help in the greenification, both of the transport and the production. And I think the last word is that also we are looking very carefully in Software Republic at the greenification of the digital tools themselves, and clearly low energy data, I would say sometimes even low data, is one of the concerns we have in the product we develop, because this is also a major stake, we think, in the greenification. So we try to embed that from the origin in the way we design and we think this is the new product in software.
Thank you, Eric. If I may add a question, you mentioned low data, low energy data. So it's clear that data is at the core of Renault's strategy for the future. And I'll be very interested if you could say a few words about your approach to data access, data sharing, because data is really the core and the value of Renault going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a change of culture inside the company, outside the company, and I think there was a first phase to consider that data as value. I think this is, of course, now very clear around us and also inside our industry. Now, I think what is the next step is that to identify how mixing the data from different sectors, like we are doing in the Software Republic, can actually more value for the customer, for the citizens, for our company. So this is a change of culture from, I would say, to data bundling, which is very important. The second point on data is that we should know and data as a cost. And like any other product, you need balance between cost and value. And for industrial player like us, it's a day-to-day decision on how we invest, whether we are investing on the hardware side or on the software side. So how to find the right balance, but there is no free data, that's for sure. And last point, which seems for us very important, is the explainability of data and of what we do with data for the citizen, for the customer, for the employees. I think the black box way of having data managed cannot be sustainable, cannot be scalable, and we are really for this vision, covering all this. That's a main concern for Software Republic, and it was mentioned before, cybersecurity is a must, and we have a long way to go there, because there is also from that standpoint a big change of culture, but we are very actively working on this, and I think that the momentum is great.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I think it was very helpful to understand the position of the industry in its complexity and diversity. And I think you, in this regard, to identify the importance weeks, months and per definition, the role of the French presidency in this regard to better understand what we are talking about. So we are nearly on time. So let me thank you very much for your participation this morning. I hope you will stay with us because we are now opening the debate on the various speakers. It would be great for you to have your reaction on in this regard. But without losing more time, let me turn to Nicolas van der Merch, which is going to kick off this discussion. Nicolas is the president of Renaissance Numérique. For the one who don't know Renaissance Numérique, because you're not French, is one of the major think tanks on digital in France. And the reason we wanted morning is that Renaissance Numérique is about to publish a report on sovereignty and strategic autonomy. So we thought it would be a great introduction to our debate. Nicolas, can we be privileged and have a heads up of what you're or the main findings of your report before we turn to our other speakers to comment and to express what their approach in this regard?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Hello, everybody. And Samantha for having us this morning. Last year, 1 year ago, we launched a working group on digital sovereignty. There was a rising digital sovereignty agenda, especially in France. It's very connected to the COVID crisis. I don't have to explain the context, and Cecilia talked about it quite nicely. So we set up a working group, typical Renaissance Numérique way, because we got a diversity of actors like academics, small and large, national, international companies, European, American, non-European companies, NGOs, and some experts. And we tried to make a big focus on what would be this idea and to frame, understand, decompose this idea of European digital sovereignty. We did a lot of hearings. We established a state-of-the-art academic institutional literature and so on. And today I only have the first step in our reflection that we will publish in a few days, maybe. We're finishing at the moment, which is more defining the terms of the debate and the objectives that lay behind these terms for the EU. So I have, and the next step for us will be, of course, to think of solutions, strategy, and try to animate a discussion next year, especially during the French presidency on this topic. So what are the main points that we have at the moment? I have four ideas that I want to share with you. The first is that this question of sovereignty is arising in a classic sense. The idea of sovereignty is a very European notion. It started with a French notion in a very French and English dialogue. I don't want to talk about Jean Bodin, Hobbes, and Locke, and Rousseau, who have been speaking about it. And we invite European actors to consider, European actors being economic or political, to consider this concept in its original sense in order to establish a clear objective for the European Union. Sovereignty evokes the power of member states to act or the power of being able. It is sometimes and very often confused between sovereignty and strategic autonomy, but they don't act, they don't operate at the same level. Strategic autonomy is both a means to and a dividend of sovereignty. And we think it can be really discussed on different steps. The point I wanted to, the issue at stake for us is more the impact of digital technologies on sovereignty, and it's not sovereignty in cyberspace. We think that technology is both a new context and a strategic layer in which we have to operate. It's a new strategic dimension in which we have to think. But it's not a strategic dimensions like any other. It's not land, sea, aerospace. It embraces all of them. And the mastery of this dimension makes it possible to regain sovereignty in other strategic dimensions. So we don't have to think of it like only sovereignty in cyberspace. And therefore, it brings me to the third idea, is that mastery of this digital strategic dimension is based on the mastery of the strategic layers of the digital technologies. That's why we would like to European technological sovereignty than only digital, because it's not only a matter of digital technology. It's more broadly, it embraces a number of critical technologies such as semiconductors and so on. Cecilia talked about it a little bit earlier. And the sovereignty issues that emerges in this number of layers, in this value chain, from the raw materials necessary to manufacture chips to the exploitation of data to the use of digital services, is very transversal. And it is extremely important that the European Union should identify between the different layers and think of which are critical and essential to guarantee strategic autonomy. And the fourth idea that we have, which will lead to a conclusion, I'll try to make it short, is that for investment capacity reasons, there'll be technological sovereignty only at the community level. It's possible to question the relevance of aiming for European technological sovereignty. But we can only envision it at the European level. This raises a lot of questions on the link between the European Union and member states. Should they, will the member states want, should and will in strategic digital matters, and should prevalence of procedure enshrined in the European Union law on this matter? So as a conclusion, we think that granting digital sovereignty is a policy of empowerment in a field of independence. It includes refusing or knowingly reducing some interdependencies in the name of an objective of sovereignty. It's therefore a matter of the European Union being sovereign without closing itself up. We also think that if the member states want to guarantee their technological sovereignty, it can only be European. It's no question of giving up national sovereignty. It's strengthening it by giving themselves to a collective means. But for this to happen, it's essential to get out of the confusion of the terms and to set up a clear path where economic challenges of digital technologies can conceal issues of a political and strategic nature. And they must be understood as is. And in the European Union, economic power is very often not thought to serve nations, not thought to serve political means, and they are not thought out politically. Technological and economic issues are not thought out politically. So we think of the United States that have developed a strategic approach to the economy. Won't talk about the FISA or the information superhighway, which include in their definition this idea of national sovereignty. And we think that we need an offensive approach creates traction and thinks of bonding political and economic agendas in the coming months or years at the EU level. So that are the four main ideas and the conclusion that we had that could frame the debate, and I hope that you will be able to read that in more than 5 minutes in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Nicolas, on some very good food for thoughts for the participants, and especially for the panelists who are just going to join me after your presentation. I'm sure it's going to inspire them. So let me introduce our speakers at the table. So first of all, we have the pleasure to have with us Michel is the CEO of OVH Cloud, one of the major European cloud service providers, and a Numeum member. We also have the VP Government Affairs and Public Policy EMEA at Salesforce. And Salesforce is one of the pure cloud computing players and a Numeum member as well. We also have the pleasure to have Mathieu Veil, head of the Digital Economy Department of the French Ministry of Economy. So Mathieu's department is responsible for shaping the digital agenda of the French EU presidency. And we also have with us Anthony Whelan, cabinet of President von der Leyen, advising the President on digital policies. And welcome, Anthony. And we also have the pleasure to have with us Eva Medel, member of the European Parliament, working on some of the key files of the tech sector, such as AI and cyber security. So let me quickly enter into the discussion and give the floor to Michel. I'd like to, so we all know that OVH Cloud is one of the main cloud players. You are involved in the Gaia X initiative. You have announced some major partnership with Atos and Google recently. And we know that strategic autonomy is very important for you. So we have heard Minister Ho speaking. We have heard Nicolas just presenting this definition of digital sovereignty. Hear from you, how does OVH Cloud approach strategic autonomy, Michel?
Thank you very much for Numeum to organize this event, and I'm very pleased to be with you, and thank you again for organizing that. Before, maybe I would like to just introduce quickly OVH Cloud, because I think it's important to understand what is our position. We are a European cloud provider. We are the #1. We're in the top 10 worldwide, but as you know, it's mainly dominated by some American and Chinese players. And our positioning is to provide open, reversible, transparent cloud. De facto monopoly, which is unfortunately the case, is not good for the market, it's not good for innovation, and is not good for the customer. And now we see more and more for the citizen. And why we try to push for innovative, open, reversible solutions. And this is really related to what we are sovereignty. You mentioned, and Nicolas mentioned about sovereignty, about the state and things like this. And there is a little bit of debate about what does it mean sovereignty. And clearly our positioning and our vision of sovereignty is first, the capability to have freedom of choice. You can be a sovereign as a state, as a company, or even as an individual, if you have the freedom of choice. And we do believe that in the cloud market, why it's critical, because as you mentioned, chipset components are key to maintain the capacity of freedom of choice. But we do believe, as the data is becoming so important in our personal, in our professional life, that the cloud industry is becoming a major asset. It's not only the value added, and we mentioned artificial intelligence or this type of software. No, if we do not, as Europeans, to the moving to the operating system, moving to the cloud, and also to the applications, and I don't say all of the components, we will not be able to be free, which means that we'll have an open, but we will be excluded from the openness of the market. And it will be a very important for the future of the strategic autonomy of Europe. The cloud is a 500 billion market by 2030. It will be bigger than the European market. And that's the reason why we do believe it's absolutely that the Europe can propose alternative solutions. And we want modestly with others, because one of the key elements we do believe is that we need to create ecosystem. We need in the software, in the chipset, everything to be able to propose alternative. And you know that that strategic, we all know that strategic autonomy in the EU is priority, but at this stage, this concept is currently facing different approach and different interpretations in the member states. So we are in the middle of the bridge. We are the crossing roads. And we do believe that we should do not no compromise on what is data sovereignty and what is data technology. And just briefly rephrase what we do believe that. Data sovereignty is the capability to have really the mandatory compliance with the European laws. We should be very proud of what has been achieved by Europe as the GDPR. GDPR is something which is absolutely critical. And if we look at the vision of the data privacy in China, I really do prefer that we have the GDPR. That's why we do believe that data sovereignty should be implemented everything. We should not have any extraterritorial laws of any kind. The Cloud Act in the US or the Chinese laws are offering extraterritorial laws, and this is something that Europe should never accept. We should have zero compromise. On data technology, I think technological sovereignty is a little bit different. I think there we need to gain autonomy, but the starting point is a little below, and we need to have a path to move to more technological sovereignty. That's the reason why we do believe that it's important to invest to create champions in Europe. We were the first unicorn, and now we are a public company, and we went to the French Euronext because we do believe it's important to scale and to be able, again, to create champions in Europe to propose alternative. Members of states like France have decided to move and to take concrete actions to start to build a strategic, for instance, by imposing its own administration to choose cloud services that guarantee data sovereignty, and we welcome such a position. The European Union has also decided to move by initiating an unprecedented overload of regulatory framework of the digital economy, and some various texts are planned and could be potentially impact the cloud sector. This is a unique opportunity to regain control of the rules of the game that non-European private actors have so far been able to define and impose. We should avoid de facto monopolies. It's good for the market, it's good for the customers, it's good for the citizens. This is why I think the French UE presidency is a critical momentum for the EU digital economy. The framework for the next decades will be discussed in the next month. DMA, Data Act, cloud certifications. And as a leading European cloud player, we believe that France's priorities are the following ones. Redefine the key principle to put an end to unfair practices to impose data interoperability, reversibility, and portability. As Cecilia said, as Eric said, openness is key. But today, the key players are creating barriers to entry and exit. Reversibility of the data should be a must, with no compromise. Like in the telco, the portability of the number. Support members, the second point is support member states exemplariness by rethinking the public order for the digital sector. In the US, in China, the digital industry is massively helped by public ordering. It should be the same for the European champions in Europe. We should, as a third point, to guarantee the cloud strict security levels by adding the immunity criteria in terms of technical, because cybersecurity is absolutely mandatory, and it's a key element, but also legal certifications, and again, because we should have no compromise with data sovereignty. And last but not least, the first point should be that we should, as an organization, reduce the data center carbon footprint through a global, recognized, and practical indicator for public and private users.
Thank you very much. That was very important to hear you how you are an emblematic European champion. So very clear and straightforward. I think everybody heard you. So and so that will allow certainly the debate with our next speaker. Stephanie, you're the VP of European Affairs for Salesforce, probably the more European of the American company. It's also interesting that in this debate we have two key cloud players. I'm sure that you have a lot to say on this debate. How do you see, as an American company, this debate on strategic autonomy and sovereignty? Floor is yours.
Thank you, Tema, and thank you all for having me today. Start with a brief intro about Salesforce, because we always say cloud, and also to understand sometimes our point of view compared to that of Michel or maybe some others, where we actually are in the value chain. So Salesforce is an enterprise software company. born in the cloud 22 years ago. And as you said, born in the cloud in the US, but in Europe for 21 years. So actually we moved to Europe very rapidly. And what do we do? So we started with our CRM, so that would be the customer relationship management and helping companies manage their relationship to their own customers. And so what does that mean in terms of cloud value chain? Top, if you look at it, as in that we're doing software, the known software as a service layer, and a little bit of platform. On the infrastructure as a service, that is not our business. We do own some data centers. We also have partnerships with others, but this is not what our business really lies on. Our value is really to create value for our customers. In terms of the business model, we're in that very B2B environment, which means, and some other will recognize that, we're the data of our customers, but it is theirs. So we're not in a business to make money out of their data. We want them to be successful. So we're really in the part of processing the data on behalf of our customers. We give them value. We give them insight. We give them one single view of their customers, what they want to do. We enable marketing campaigns. I will not go into the whole suite of products, but it's really important to understand. And even, for instance, when we discuss data sharing or other things, really what we do with the data is what our big or small enterprises tell us to do with it. And it's very strictly framed in our contracts. So that's just a little bit to see a little bit the mindset of the company and how we are. Now, first of all, before we dive right into the strategic autonomy and looking at the French presidency, even the new presidency of the European Union that we have at the moment, we very much welcome the focus on technology, right? It has been the forefront and the greening of the economy and the focus on digital transformation. This is very much aligned with what we have been focusing on for the past year. And it is really important that it is said out loud. Sometimes digital was a transversal issue. Sometimes it was a separate pillar. Here, just and one of the most important priorities. And that's something really welcome. So the first understanding on the autonomy, it's really looking at Europe, right? I'm French and I'm European. And if you look at it, we see all the value that has been created in Europe. Even for Salesforce, Europe has been the fastest growing regions for a year, right? There is a lot of potential here. And there is a need to continue to grow the European tech scene, yes, to more European unicorns, and also to enable the digital transformation. We heard it from there are strong success stories, and not only in the tech space in Europe, and we want those to continue to succeed. We see really now, how do we do that without limiting or foreclosing Europe? I liked very much what Nicolas was saying from Renaissance Numérique about the power of being managing to bring it back to the philosopher is always amazing, but it brings us back to what it really means, right? It's the power of being able. And actually, I would also very much agree with Michel on the freedom of choice. We're here to make our customers successful, and we want to give them choices. And I think that's really what unites us. And for us, sovereignty should be about the ability of European organizations to choose the best available technology and have full control over their data and full transparency about the way it is being processed. And I think that's the key, and that's almost non-negotiable at this stage. And I think we all agree on that we need people want to understand. And I'm talking citizens, I'm talking businesses, all need to know what is happening. Like, tech cannot be a black box. And I think we moved away from that, but that's a given, and that should be the basis. Now comes the question on how do we do that? And I think that should really be the right question here, is how do we establish that right framework? We have regulations on the table. We also know we have really strong regulations that have been adopted. And I will be with you on this, that Europe has been a leading force for tech governance or data governance. And I think even on the US side and the Chinese side, everywhere in the world, it has been recognized. And I think, well, if you look at the conversation we could have had 10 years ago, it is now a given that Europe is looked at as a leader in that sphere, and it's respected. So I think it's really about that magical striking the right balance, about being very clear about what needs to be clearly set and have transparent rules, but then also where does it stop and where do we still want to all work together and be business partners? And I think that's really important for us companies, and I think companies like Salesforce that want to play and have a play and also abide by European rules here, but to also work on a robust framework where we only have the legal certainty we need. And I'll speak on our behalf, but also of some of customers or small companies, legal certainty around your framework, knowing what is the rule, what is good enough, when can I engage with a partner is very important. And in that sense, we very much welcome the initiative from the French government to say we need to put those rules on paper. We need to have a clear framework so that everybody knows what are the rules of the game. Then my maybe slight, and I think actually it's not a disagreement in any way because I heard it many times, it's really work together at the European level. I think we all know the strengths of the European continent or of the EU is that what we have in common and what we can do together and that we can have that strong market. I do believe, and I'm happy to hear Michel's views on this as well, is we need a strong, large market for companies to scale and grow. And I think this is really the value, but also for others to invest and make all the necessary changes. I think having a big, strong European market is going to be the key. And it's the same when we go into certification, which is always a little bit more in the weeds of what we're going to discuss, but it's so key because certifications or labels is how you show trust or you build that trust with your customers. So a robust system like the European certification scheme that is recognized and agreed from one country to another within the EU is a very strong asset and something we would welcome. I'm going to stop here to leave room for the conversation. I'm going too much more into details, but I very much look forward to the conversation.
So many thanks, Stephanie. I'm just quickly handing over to Mathieu at this stage because we had the pleasure to hear Nicolas, we had the pleasure to hear two industry players. And now I would say my question to you, Mathieu. Do you think the priority of the French EU presidency will be able to meet the expectations of the industry players who just spoke before you?
Thank you, François. Thank you, Numeum, and thank you, Thelma, and the Salmon practice. It's great to be here. We're at a point in time where, in the French government, as you can imagine, we are very much excited about the time that are coming for us as a presidency of the council. We're getting ready for 6 months. Yes, 6 months of very intense work. And we have a packed agenda. And as you said, François, a lot of expectations. The expectations are immense. They were mentioned earlier by Cecilia. Michel was very clear and outright about what he was expecting, and we are delighted to discuss this. Stephanie was also expressing expectations very clearly. And certainly we are going to do our best to address this, bearing in mind that the presidency of the council is just a honest broker. It's taking an agenda that's already existing and moving it forward with as much energy and if we're fortunate, leadership as we can. But what's certain is that the topic of this panel, the digital strategic autonomy, digital sovereignty, this is going to be a very strong aspect of the agenda. It is already, and it certainly will be under the French presidency. So I want to thank Nicolas and Renaissance Numérique for the very thoughtful and promising contribution. It just gave us an outline, but I'm really looking forward to reading it more in details. And not only because there are French philosophers mentioned, that's always a pleasure, but also because this concept is very key in many of the debates recently on the political scene, but also in the regulation scene for us. So I just want to straighten a couple of points about our view of strategic autonomy, digital sovereignty, and that's going to echo a number of the previous speakers' points. The first thing is, yes, we are also of the view that autonomy, digital sovereignty, those are concepts that rely on the freedom of choice, freedom to choose how we structure markets, freedom to choose, how the digital uses are going to shape our societies, and we also know, and that's the second conviction, that there is no freedom of choice if we don't have some form of autonomy over technologies. Because digital is a technology, but it's also a very strong power of being everywhere in the markets, everywhere in society. And we know this is now widely recognized. It hasn't been the case. In a few years back, it wasn't as recognized as it is now. And I think this is important. There's also a couple of points about what we think digital sovereignty or autonomy is not about. It is not about just protecting some companies, large companies from the past. It's not about building barriers for the benefit of building barriers. It's not about protectionism. It's about ensuring that openness, fairness, freedom of choice that are advocated by many are rooted in the reality and are not just words. I think that's absolutely essential. And as far as the presidency of the council can work, obviously there's the existing agenda for the council, and it's pretty packed. I think it was said earlier, obviously there are essential work being done about regulation, setting standards for the next 10, 15, 20 years in terms of digital services, in terms of shaping the markets. Of course, DSA and DMA are very high on the agenda right now. But we fully agree that Europe should not only be renowned for setting the standards at a global stage, and we are, certainly, with the success of GDPR, amongst other things, but also that beyond that has to be of efforts that has to be dedicated to building Europe innovation ecosystem. I'm very much in line with Michel on this point. This is about building the ecosystem. This is about investment. There are very strong projects in various fields that relate to digital, IPCIs on the cloud, on the connectivity. Those are essential parts, non-legislative ones, of the digital. And what matters is that Europe is the right level to address those issues of ecosystem. Any country by itself is not sufficient. As dynamic as Numeum can be, it is probably not going to have an impact as long as it stays only French. And so that's why we welcome its greater and greater integration with the European ecosystem. So the IPC, there's been an initiative called Scale Up Europe to maintain these dynamics. It should not be a one-off event, but has to keep the momentum. There's obviously around data a number of files being open, some legislative, others more on the standard setting aspects of sharing, interoperability, portability with Gaia X, which we are obviously very strong supporters of. And we want to see a number of data spaces and practical examples of this European way of sharing data being advanced in the next few months. And I've mentioned regulation, I've mentioned innovation ecosystems. I think we also need to collectively work at building a sustainable digital world. Today, I'm at the Telecom Council meeting where the Nis-2 Directive is going to be discussed between ministers of the Council. We're expecting a significant step forward. That's going to be one of the files that we take over in the French presidency, obviously. But cybersecurity is a major threat for the digital ecosystem that we need to address collectively. And of course, and I'm glad Michel mentioned it as well, we also need to step up with the ecological transformation as well by building a greener digital environment. Those are the key issues that point for the digital environment. I mean, the whole economy is shifting quite fast, but for digital, this is particularly true. And Europe is at the center of this new way of building digital. And we are really looking forward to making strides in the next 6 months with the presidency, with the council members, with the parliament, with all stakeholders. That's why it's important to keep engaging with you all, and listening to these expectations, which we are taking very, very seriously. And hopefully, as Cecilia was saying, when we meet in June physically, we can all celebrate about the great progress that we've made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathieu. I will just remember, I would say what you just said, Europe is the right level to address issues of the ecosystem. That's a nice to Anthony, as he represents the EU Commission on this panel. And Anthony, my question to you is, what are the Commission's priority for the digital agenda in order to build strategic autonomy?
Thanks, Francois, and good morning, everyone. Well, in a way, it's all been set out twice in a way, because we, in February 2020, set out the main elements of our agenda for the mandate as regards digital in the Shaping Europe's Digital Future communication. And then, with the benefit of more or less a year's experience, we zeroed in a bit more in March of this year with the Digital Decade, Digital Compass communication, where we articulated a number of specific targets in terms of outputs of our digital work in areas related to people and skills, in relation to infrastructure and capacities, digitization of business, digitization of administration. So I think the agenda is very clear, and is, I think, very well rooted in our organizing concept of this morning of perhaps more of technological sovereignty than of open strategic autonomy. I think a useful insight from Nicolas' presentation is that these are related concepts, but not synonyms. And we, from the outset, in February 2020, I think, without having had perhaps quite so Cartesian an analysis, or having gone back to Hobbes and Locke and Galland Compagnie, we actually defined our concept of technological sovereignty in a way that I think is very well echoed in some of the 4 points that Nicolas made. It's about capacities to act in order to act in accordance with our values, which is in a way about freedom to choose the values by which we live as Europeans, that it is open in the sense that it is not defined against anyone, but simply about ensuring that people, operators in Europe, play by European rules. So I think there's actually a lot of common ground about the starting points at that level. If I might, reaching back to Cecilia's intervention, I agree with Cecilia on very many things. I would not agree that there is a dichotomy where we would say that we need to define where we need to be sovereign versus where we need to be open. Sovereignty is fully compatible with being open, and we are, I think, very keen with a focus on capacities to act to make sure that when we develop European capacities, that remains in the context of a market where others are welcome, provided that they are willing to play by the rules. If I might, I'll finish with, let's say, the more high-level remarks. If there was one thing in Nicolas' framing of the subject that I might diverge with slightly, it was when he said, after his 4 framing points, that this implies knowingly reducing some interdependencies. Now, I think we clearly and have explicitly said in, for example, our industrial strategy update of this year, that we need to address a certain number of strategic and critical dependencies when we are really very heavily reliant on certain providers of vital goods or services, and the semiconductor story, I think, is one of a few in this area. Interdependencies are not in themselves bad things as long as the interdependency is balanced, and we have, I think, enough leverage in a broader value chain to be sure that we can defend our interests. After that, there may be some very critical technologies where you need to be sure you have that along with all the others, and that may indeed be one of the very distinguishing features of the discussion on the European Chips Act and some of the key technologies there. So now I start getting at least a little bit more concrete. Obviously, it's one of the, let's say, the novelties that will come in the period of the French presidency, that we should come with our more concrete proposals in the area of semiconductors, which are likely to have a focus on some of the things mentioned inter alia by Mathieu, on having production capacity, a choke point at the moment, but also about having the innovation ecosystems to be able to have vibrant sectors in Europe that are chip users, including users of the most sustainable cutting-edge chips, because if we want to be leaders in chips, it is not principally in order to then export them to East Asia, although that's also fine, but it is because for a variety of European interests and industries. Looking more broadly, I think, as Mathieu said, of course, the presidency takes an agenda that it finds at the beginning of its semester. I think France has been fortunate in the previous presidency's work on some very key files, and the readiness of the DMA and DSA in the council prep, and the broadly similar evolution on the parliament side is truly impressive. So I think Mathieu has plenty of work on his table on those 2 files. As he hinted, I'm pretty confident that he will have trilogues on cybersecurity to fill his days and nights as well. He is perhaps rather happy, and this is very close to some of the issues that Michel raised in particular, that the got political agreement, hopefully to be signed off formally very soon, which includes the focused uses of certain types of data sharing scenarios, some key provisions on protecting the sovereign without that becoming a block to free data flows, but becoming simply a conditioning factor for data flows. I think that's very important because it follows the same logic of the GDPR, which he cited with approval. And I think this will be an important precedent for us in preparing the proposal on the Data Act, which all going well and subject to the happily rigorous internal impact assessment scrutiny that we apply in the Commission, should come still in the early part of the French presidency, where the issues of how we frame data security in both the cyber but also the juridical sense, and the question of the basic rules of the game on open cloud markets with switching and portability will be certainly very central to the legislative consideration. Maybe, although I've probably spoken too long, it's not just about rules, although they are important in framing our choices and ensuring compliance with our values. On the broader question of innovation ecosystems and technological capacity, I think Nicola made a very important point about certain features here only being attainable at the European level. But when you get into areas where public investment is important, one cannot escape the iron logic of a European budget at 1% of GNI. So this can only work where public investment is involved, with very, very close cooperation between the European and the national levels, and maximal orientation of the same direction. The IPC coordination tool is a intense process of discussion with member states on their national resilience and recovery programs has been an important part of that. But it is a constant effort because, of course, the national special claims on national spending are always there. And I think it will remain with us through this mandate and beyond. The important European effort that is needed to point public investment in common areas, addressing the market failures that reduce our capacity to act in the digital and broader technological field. Thanks very much.
And thank you very much, Anthony, for this comprehensive presentation. Back to the other speakers, as clearly we have now quasi the entire element of the equation to understand what is at stake, what the discussion is about. And we were just missing an important part, which is the legislative part, the representation of the people. So let me turn now to Eva Meidel. Eva, you're an emblematic MEP in the digital area. And I believe that your hands are pretty full regarding the digital agenda at the European Parliament between DSA, DMA, digital, the Data Act, data governance, and so on and so forth. And I believe a lot more to come. But so my main question would be, do you think that are the right subject and they are handling well from your viewpoint? But maybe first, hearing you on the strategic autonomy and reacting on what have been said just before would be great.
Thank you very much and good morning. I hope you can hear me well. It's always very difficult to be the last speaker in such a comprehensive and engaging discussion. So first of all, I try to be brief, and while giving my views on the strategic autonomy, what I will try to do is combine some of the things we've heard already and put them in a little bit of concreteness. Because when we speak about definitions of strategic autonomy, I often think they're a bit like definitions of a good life. Everyone seems to know what it is, but as soon as you try to verbalize it, it starts not to be that easy. So still, I have to say that I think of strategic autonomy in 4 ways, and I think some of these ways were already touched upon. And I think this is the freedom to do something and the freedom from something being done to you. And so it has an internal but also an external dimension. And I will add my take on digital sovereignty for each of these 4 points. So first, I think the freedom to do something inside the EU. Here we need to be quicker. I think data infrastructure open, but is also there is also industry, but it's some sort of a firm organizing hand, and that's why we have some of the files that the previous speakers mentioned. Necessary organizing hand, and that is gaining from the really amazing industrial and commercial data we produce here in Europe. I think we also need a communication infrastructure that can handle the high security, the low latency, and really the huge number of devices. One performance metric of 6G, for example, that I heard recently almost seems unbelievable. It will have to deal with 10 million devices in 1 square kilometer. 10 million devices in 1 square kilometer is like 100 devices per person. And some of those will be cars, for example, where our loved ones are being transported. So only with such an infrastructure and very concrete rules, we can have a market that's strong enough to be called sovereign. And I think during the past couple of months and the months to come during the French presidency, we are going to be working on some of those really crucial files that will enable to have that infrastructure. The second dimension of autonomy, as I said, is the freedom to act globally. And also here, digital autonomy is absolutely key. That is not in the minds, however, of many who do geopolitics. And that's why people that are on today's call and in this meeting are so important to chip in wherever there's geopolitics and bring this digital dimension. And this is why I think there, often for Europe and for the tech topic, we need to ask this question that we often ask ourselves: can we be at the table and not on the menu? And to do that, few things are needed. First, we need a very stable, global, democratic digital market that we put together with the US, with like-minded other nations like Japan and India. And in this respect, as it was also mentioned before, the TTC is absolutely key how it will progress from here onward. And secondly, for this to happen though, Europe has to make sure that it avoids being the weakest link. This market will be the target of others, and so we have to make, so to say, the best shield against this unfriendly, multipolar world we find ourselves. And the third and fourth dimension, I will combine them as I know time is pressing us, and I would like also to hear from the audience. I think this third and fourth dimension is our freedom from the interference of others inside the EU and globally. And here I think lies a very difficult truth, because the interference comes from friends, but it also comes from foes. So we have to differentiate those. And I sit in the largest political family in the European Parliament, the EPP, the European People's Party, and we know where we stand on this. But nonetheless, we can easily lessen our exposure by thinking long-term and by being strategic. And again, some of those files, whether it's the DMA, the DSA, whether it's the Nis-2, of which I am also having a role as EPP rapporteur, just like on the other files, they will be really important for that long-term perspectives. So we have to identify our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities and threats, and I'm sure that the cabinet of the president in the commission, but also Marc Rette's and Thierry Breton's cabinet have done some sort of a SWOT exercise, at least one or two. But many citizens and opinion leaders have not done this for the EU and for the digital world. And I think that needs to be some sort of a constant exercise in our minds. And I would like to see the French presidency further excelling in that end. And I'm sure the Parliament would like to position itself as a partner, of course, in the next couple of months to find solutions and balance approaches ahead of us.
Thank you very much, Eva, and thank you to have been efficient in your message. And of course, we could go on and on and on, but we have 10 minutes left, so no time for a real debate there. So what I'm going to suggest is for the participant to this roundtable to take 2 minutes, up to 3, but not more, to react to what have been said on the most important points, but more than what they expect from the French presidency, what would be the priority, what would be the recommendations. So again, it's been so interesting that we didn't see the time went by. So maybe we can start with you, Michel, as you were the first speaker.
Okay, I think I mentioned already waiting or looking for 4 major points. Clearly, and I'm very pleased with what Eva and Anthony has said. I think we need to have clear rules, especially in the cloud. I reiterate the fact that the cloud has regulation today in the US, in China, in India, in Russia, but today not in Europe. We have regulations about data protection, GDPR. And I think I will extend that also to the fairness of access for really avoid unfair practices which impose de facto monopoly. And I think the DMA and also the Data Act will be absolutely key there. The second point is clearly to create all the elements to guarantee at the same time openness and regulation. And I do believe that regulations will create openness, because in fact, it's by imposing reversibility of the data that we will create the data lakes that the industry will need. And for me, it's very mandatory that we do this openness. And today we see that there are locking strategy by some players, which are, as I repeat, de facto monopolies. There are legal barriers, there are technical barriers. We are a very open source sponsor, and we do believe this is important to have open APIs. And also there are some financial, like egress, expensive, I would say, tariffs, which prohibit the reversibility of the data. The first one is definitely about security, and cybersecurity is for me something where Europe has to create for the individual, the companies and the state the right regulations, but also certifications to guarantee legal and technical security. And last but not least is really our green strategy. I think we need there also to make sure that the data centers, the cloud will be able to continue to propose very innovative solutions to reduce our carbon footprint and also to reduce our energy consumption. So for me, this is what we are waiting for. But I don't think this is only the French presidency. I think this is, as we said, an ecosystem. This is the full Europe. As French, of course, as a French company and French, I'm very happy. But I see that the DMA, there is all the members have decided to go and proceed at humanity. There is all of them were in favor. I hope it will be the same for DSA. I hope it will be for the Data Act, and I hope also for the certifications that we will have a common goal, because I do believe that the values of Europe are really extraordinarily good, and we need to protect them.
Thank you very much, Michel. Stephanie, do you want to jump in?
Sure, and also happy to be brief. And thanks to everyone for the great conversation. I think I'm not going to come with a laundry list of asks of the French presidency. I think Mathieu has his full list already. Maybe my ask would be to have a seat at the table for foreign companies. Clearly, that is the elephant in the room here, is how do we work together? What do we have in common? Where does Europe go its own way? And I think really having that open dialogue with the companies that are willing to play by the rule and that really want to lean in and work together and fit into that framework. I think that's my ask, and obviously also offer. And also, I would say just a focus on multilateral fora like the OECD discussion on data access, that because we need to find political and solutions between governments. We need strong transatlantic relationships. And I think this is where there is some hope on our side to see things to unlock a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stéphanie. Mathieu? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Do you really want me to add my list of expectations?
Feel free to use your time as you wish.
A little bit of work. That's my main expectation. No, I think 2 points I want to comment very briefly on because they've been mentioned. So first, I want to support Anthony when he says we should not oppose these discussions about digital sovereignty with openness. This is, I think, a very critical point. Not much hope of digital sovereignty by being closed in today's world, and especially in digital. So its openness can also be a tool to build greater digital sovereignty, greater autonomy. It's just about being clear that it's not openness as an end. Openness is a mean to the end of being more autonomous, being more sovereign in a way, but also to grow. So I think that's the first thing. It's exactly the same as opposing sustainability and innovation. Both will go hand in hand. It's not either the ecological transformation or the digital transformation. Extremely important when we engage in the three main areas that will be at the agenda for the next 6 months. And once again, this is the French presidency, it could be another, and this agenda is here before us, whether it's French or German or any other country, standard setting rules that are going to create fairness, openness, more responsibility, more responsible digital world for the benefit of everyone. A better innovation ecosystem in Europe, which is certainly the step that we need to make collectively. That is the higher step. And of course, sustainability, as was mentioned by Michel. But that's really, I think, the key areas that we need to work on.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Anthony?
Thanks. I'll start where I left off on the question of finding the means for the EU and the member state level to collaborate not just on legislative but also on broader policy and investment dimensions. I think for this, one other item on Mathieu's well-filled table is the Digital Decade Policy Programme, because this seeks to create a structured means of having such a cooperation between the two levels in order to progress. So hopefully that one moves forward as well. Second point, we should not just look at the things with digital in the tag. I think there's some very important broader initiatives either happening or on the road that are very important for our digital ambitions. I would mention, for example, the work of the European Innovation Council, because this is really a boost to innovation. Even just yesterday, I think, leveraged it by cross-reference into our risk capital guidelines for state aid in order that it can be used more broadly. Equally, the actions we will take on standards with a strategy likely in the first quarter will be very important, I think, more generally, but in particular because standards will be so important to compliance with some of our regulation, which is my lead to a reference to the AI Act, which will be critically based on standards in order to be successful and to be implementable easily by businesses. And final point, reacting to Eva, yes, of course, we must do SWOT assessments. There is nothing like a negotiation with a friendly partner, but whose interests are not perfectly aligned, to crystallize those issues. So the TTC has been a wonderful process of sorting out exactly where our offensive defensive interests are, our strengths and weaknesses. The digital partnerships that we will hopefully work on with Indo-Pacific partners will be a similar process, I'm sure, because ultimately open is not a synonym of naive. We must be open because it's good for us, but we must also seek to make sure that others are open as well. My final point is a bon weekend to all, but of course in particular to Mathieu, because it's probably more or less the last one until July. And thank you, everyone.
And last but not least, Eva.
Thank you very much. I might also end up on a lighter note because this has been one very serious discussion, and it has to be, of course, because the issues at stake are such. But it's very difficult, again, to add anything new. Maybe some of you that know me know that I'm in favor of legislating swiftly, of allocating files swiftly, and I hope that we will see not many delays coming from the European Parliament. I think we lose often unnecessary time in trying to this committee gets certain files, and sometimes it takes up to even 6 months to decide that. So I would like to see less battles in the Parliament of which committee should leave, meaning we need to have more clarity already coming from the Commission on that, and then working precisely on the topic. But to finish on a more light point, because it seems that sleepless nights are only not coming when you're a mom or a dad from your children where they're sick, which happened to me last night. And I know a number of you on this call have complained to me of such nights, so to say, and we've complained to each other. But when my team heard what Anthony Wieland said about the Nis-2 negotiations, I think my team quickly went on LinkedIn to check whether there's some more appealing type of job, in case they would have to be accompanying me to these long hours trialogues on the Nis-2 directive. So it might be just easier for the French presidency to think that the European Parliament position is good enough on the Nis-2 and on the DMA, for example. But I know it's always challenging to reach an agreement. It won't be my first trialogue, so I look forward to really engaging time also with Mathieu Viro and his team on this and other topics, because I believe it's absolutely crucial for any of the targets we've put, whether they're sustainable targets, digital targets, to get this legislation up and running and to make them enforceable, most importantly. And on the way, while European companies and economy, I hope we will not forget to address also the digital divide we still have across regions and across countries, because only then we will be stronger as a continent and not just a set of countries.
Thank you, Eva. And it's time for us to conclude, as we are slightly running over time, and I don't want anybody to think that the French are always late. I just want to thank all our speakers today who shared their views and their expectations from the French EU presidencies. I also 250 participants who connected on this call, and many of them are still there. And I also want to thank the team who put this together, and that's first in Brussels, but not the last one. And next time, hopefully, in person. That's what Tema and us are really expecting. So, but as I had the first word, I will give the last word to Tema. So, thanks to all of you, Tema. The floor is yours for the last time.
And very quickly, because there is nothing much to add, just this sector is reputed to be to lack women. I think in this round table we had the ability to show that it's not totally true, and that there are women that are part of the debate in a great proportion. Thanks to Numeum for that, because I know it's also part of your value. So this being said, on the parity part, we are not there, but we are on a great way. I hope the French presidency will be supportive and will advance this agenda. And I wish you a nice day and a nice weekend. And Mathieu, we are with you for the next weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.